Khulu, good evening. This may sound like a rhetorical question, but do indulge me. What is your core function as Eskom?
Well, our mandate as a company is to produce and transmit electricity to all our customers across the nation.
And currently, it doesn't seem like you're doing a very good job of it.
Well, the company is having challenges, Kathy, both operationally and also in terms of its finances, which are resulting in some of the problems that we are talking about now. But in all fairness, Eskom has not implemented load shedding for quite a while now. In fact, the last time we had load shedding was during the time when there was industrial action. But yes, I agree with you. Our mandate is to produce electricity consistently. And there are times, unfortunately, when we are unable to do so.
And, you know, of course, the assumption is that most of these times that you put consumers in this situation where they have to live in doubt about whether or not they'll have electricity over a period such as the festive season, it could largely have been avoided because, number one, you haven't adhered to the South African Grid Code's requirement of at least a 20-day stockpile. Why?
Well, the genesis of this started from around November of last year when Tegeta started having problems. So Tegeta, for those who do not follow news, is a company owned by, or majority owned by the Guptas, and they had a contract with Eskom to supply us with coal at least 3 power stations. So they started defaulting from last year, and then in March this year, that's when they totally stopped supplying us with coal. So what happened was that Eskom had to take coal from some of the power stations.
Yes, but Khulu, even that was of Eskom's own making. Eskom was the one that entered into that contract that later had to be cancelled. And so while I understand that it's caused a problem, it's a problem again that has been created by Eskom. So tonight we have a situation where you're running low on stockpiles. What is your plan B?
Yes, so the plan B is that we already have 14 contracts that we have signed, and some of them have already started to deliver coal at our power stations. But because we are starting from a very low base in terms of our coal stock levels, it is going to take a bit of time before we can fully replenish our coal supplies. But we now have 14 companies that we have signed on, and there are more additional companies that we are negotiating with now. We are just waiting for the requisite approvals from the National Treasury so that we can get the coal. Another part of this, Kathy, it's important to mention that we have already also agreed with Transnet. They're going to help us in terms of their railway links so that we can take the additional coal that we have at Medupi Power Station to these other power stations that are having low stock levels.
As far as I understand, in terms of the contracts that you've entered into, that coal will effectively actually be in full effect in March. So it'll be a while before we feel the effect, or before Eskom feels the true impact of those contracts. So the big question is what happens in the meantime? And it's interesting that you've also said in your statement, you've raised issues about the rainy season in Mpumalanga that is said to contribute to the further decline in stockpiles. Surely it should have been anticipated that rain was going to come in Mpumalanga because it's not unusual. That's what happens during this time of the year.
Well, yes, Kathy, it's important to remember that it's not like there's no coal at the power stations, which is why we haven't had load shedding yet. Because we do have coal there. So the point I'm trying to say is that we are starting from a relatively low base. As you correctly mentioned in your intro, in terms of the National Grid Code, we need to have at least 20 days of coal stock levels at our power stations. We currently are having less than 20. So we do have coal, but it's not enough. So what we now have with the new contracts that we have signed on is that they are adding or topping up on what we already have. And
so Khulu, realistically, what should people expect? Because there's a reason why, even with this 10-day stockpile, you've alerted the public. There's a reason why. What should people expect going into the rest of November and December, and of course, until March, when you're expecting your supply to stabilize?
Well, the risk of load shedding will be exacerbated if we are going to have a lot of rainfall in Mpumalanga area. But currently what we are doing, Kathy, is that we still continue to have coal there, but to supplement it, we also run our diesel generators. And I have to admit that, yes, ideally we shouldn't be running our diesel generators, especially for a number of days in succession because of the diesel issues that we have in terms of the pricing arrangements. But that's what we have to do to make sure that we avoid load shedding. And as I say, between now and at least the first quarter of next year, we will be getting coal supply into our power stations so that we can go back to normalcy.
Khulu, do you think that this tumultuous experience that Eskom puts these South African consumers through, and literally because you hold a monopoly over electricity supply, you're basically holding consumers to ransom. Do you think that this is what consumers deserve?
Well, Eskom, obviously, as you should know, Kathy, is owned by government, and therefore, if they want to break the monopoly of Eskom, then clearly it will happen from that level. And currently, we do have over 100 IPPs that are already operational. So ideally or technically, the issue of a monopoly actually is just academic because we have other players in the market already. But South Africa shouldn't be having this problem with electricity. We should be having stable power supply. And yes, Eskom has to account for its part in terms of making sure that we keep the lights on. And the reason why we are using diesel and also getting new coal supplies into our power stations is exactly that, to make sure that we continue to keep the lights on. But currently, as I say, we do have a problem with the coal at 11 power stations, and management is putting plans in place to make sure that we rectify that problem.
Khulu, before I let you go, just based on your answer, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate Eskom service delivery?
Well, Kathy, Eskom service delivery clearly is going to be rated by its customers and people who depend on it.
But as a service provider, do you believe that you're giving the best possible experience or service, which is paid for, by the way, by consumers?
Well, as I said, Kathy, we shouldn't be having this problem with coal supply and the risks that we are talking about now of load shedding. A company like Eskom, especially after having operated for so many years, over 95 years, we shouldn't be having these problems. So clearly something has to be done there to make sure that we correct the situation. But ultimately, quite frankly, it is the consumer who has to judge Eskom. And as you know, some of them have voted with their pockets. They have now moved away from Eskom because of this kind of inconsistencies in terms of supply that sometimes we do have. So the final word actually comes from the suppliers. And I know for sure that many of them are not happy to hear that there's a risk of load shedding looming.
All right. So, in effect, you've actually avoided my question, but perhaps that in itself is telling. Eskom's Khulu Phasiwe. He speaks on behalf of Eskom.